Welcome to Reverb Roundtable, a weekly show that brings the brightest creative minds and digital producers in sports, entertainment, politics, news, and more to share their stories and strategies that will help you become a better leader and creator. This podcast is hosted by Clark Campbell, the founder and CEO of Reverb Agency, an event media production company where the goal is always to make great events look great online. We have all heard the phrase, content is king. Probably entirely too many times. While this statement is absolutely true, there's a second element that must pair with our content to make it truly successful. The second element is story. If you think about your favorite brands or even your favorite people, I would be willing to bet that most, if not all of them, are incredibly good storytellers. As humans, we are drawn to great stories, and knowing that helps us create compelling narratives around our brands that keep audiences engaged and increases our reach and revenue. Today, we are joined by Craig Tello, a master storyteller who spent 15 years telling stories at WWE before becoming the head of Marcom Creative and Content Strategy at Electronic Sports, or EA. In this conversation, we dive into the part story played in his career and how it can help you be a better storyteller. We also learn quite a bit about the rapidly growing esports world. Now, on to this week's episode. Here's your host, Clark Campbell.
Hey, we are here, as she said, with Craig Tello, a friend of ours. William and I are hopping in, leaping into this podcast this week with a good friend, Craig Tello. We're going to tell you a little bit more about how we met him in just a second. But Craig, what's up, man? Good morning.
Good morning. I'm feeling good today. It is a snowy Tuesday. Is it today? It's Tuesday in Stamford, Connecticut, and glad to have a good night's sleep, as I think you are as well, Clark, with your puppy sleeping through the night, as I saw.
Clark has a puppy that he just got that is keeping him up all night, but then Craig is now snowed in Connecticut and has a bunch of kids downstairs learning at his house because we're learning from home today too.
Kids and puppies.
That's right.
It's really, really, really good to have you. We met Craig Tello in Chattanooga, Tennessee during the Real-Time Summit way back in 2018, which we're going to have another one. Just stay tuned for that. Not going to give you any details yet, other than we're planning to have another one. Craig came to Chattanooga, honestly blew our minds, okay? So Craig, in just a second, is going to tell you, he used to run so much of the content engine at WWE. Yes, Worldwide Wrestling Entertainment. I just totally bombed that. But WWE. And he came and he spoke to our first Real-Time Summit audience. It was an event that had never happened before. He came and spoke to he flew to Chattanooga. We couldn't believe how gracious he was. We are honored to have him. Craig, what in the world did you used to do at WWE?
Oh, thanks a lot. And it's World Wrestling Entertainment technically, but at some point there was definitely there was just a focus on calling it WWE as if that was the core name of the brand. But initials always stand for something.
I grew up watching WCW, so
there we go.
That was the opposition. So we're and then back then it was also referred to, had a different initial at the end of it. WWW. It was WWF, and then transitioned over to entertainment as a larger scale activity and promotion. So yeah, and I know that, and I know WCW because I was a big fan, and that's really what drove and compelled me to want to. I developed a desire to go and work for that brand. And I remember sitting in the stands. It was at WrestleMania 20 in Madison Square Garden, and something that you guys talk about often is story and storytelling. And that night, the storytelling involved in the program, it was the thing that compelled me and made me say, hey, I want to go work there. That's what I'm going to do. And so that became my mission. I graduated college. I spent some time at A&E, and then, but in the background was working toward heading over to WWE. And my goal was to be a member of the storyline, the television writing team. I wanted to really build the stories because, as you'll probably hear, it'll come right out of this conversation, is storytelling has always been the most important thing to me, and the art of story.
Preach.
Yeah, preach. Right. So WWE made a big impression on me when I was young. Wanted to go and tell those stories, and I ended up there. And it was the dream role that I'd always hoped for. And it was like I have all these bruises, these permanent scars and bruises on my arm from pinching myself for what was ultimately a 15-year career. Started on that team, moved over to digital when WWE really wanted to start expanding their stories over into the web. I was a web editor. And, just over time that my job was never the same year over year. And I think that's a lot about what I hear from the conversation you guys uphold on this podcast, and other informed professionals, is that this landscape has changed so much over a decade plus, and will continue to evolve and change. And I think, like I said, at WWE, I went from web editor one year to producing original video, moving into the social universe when WWE really took on and took a bite out of social media and leaned into it. And then ultimately left there overseeing the programming and content strategy for all those platforms, or those divergent platforms, as well as the OTT, WWE Network. So determining what the original programming was in kind of in partnership with the production team. So I did a lot of cool and fun stuff, and had an awesome team. We built some really great things, and they continue to do awesome things.
A massive audience, a massive social digital audience. Massive.
True. Yeah.
I want to ask a question about that real quick before we go into where you're at now, what you're doing. So you were there for 15 years, right? At WW. So you had a front row perspective, or a high level perspective, of going from TV to the web to social, and you love story. How did you convince people, your bosses and your higher ups, that, hey, we got to tell stories on social too? It will help us grow an audience that's potentially bigger than our TV audience. How did you convince them that storytelling was important on this thing that kids use, which is called social media?
That's a great question too. And I have to probably shed a lot of any kind of quote credit associated with that, from the standpoint of, I think people may or may not be familiar with WWE's chairman, Vince McMahon. So he is probably the chief storyteller of storytellers. And I believe he had a vision, which is really what allowed that social dawn to kind of to be brought forth, which was telling the story of, so if the programming is, say, this core broadcast Monday Night Raw, Monday to Monday, every Monday you have these big tentpole moments that take place in the brand. But then what happens between those Mondays? How do you keep the story alive between Mondays? And that's what the opportunity was. And I think, while that was the vision, it was, well, what kinds of stories do we tell? How do we tell those stories? Collaborating with again, like a super awesome and intuitive team that understood the fans of the brand, really understood the universe, and really started to understand the space, which was, I would say, still burgeoning at the time, really, like social. And at the time, Facebook was so huge and critical to the business. There was no Instagram at that point. And I think as the platforms themselves shifted too, it provided us with the opportunity to really step back and say, as platforms shifted and they made Facebook, for example, change things in their algorithm to really prioritize content as opposed to link backs, we were forced to really provided with the ammunition to say, we need to tell more unique and direct, compelling stories on these platforms. It's no longer a promotional tool, not directly promotional tool. Everything sort of needs to be seen through a different lens. So between really finding some success in driving some of those stories, and having the authority of saying, this is not what these platforms are demanding, and this is also clearly not what the audience is consuming, this is the direction we need to go. And fortunately, I think the leadership there understood that and interpreted that pretty well. And I think what's interesting is just that when I first started at WWE.com, it was sort of it was secondary to the broadcast, naturally, in terms of hierarchy. And it took a lot to really, we really pushed hard to tell interesting and unique stories that weren't happening on TV. But then by the time I left WWE, we were sort of front and center, key seat at the table for any kind of key conversation around new initiatives or characterization, story building, and really helping the brand flourish. So it was like incredible experience too. And like I said, just some really fun stories that we told over the years. But I think the more important thing that I extracted from that too was just that there's a bit of exhilaration, right, around adaptation, and you continue to help yourself evolve, and you when forced to do that, you're going to do it. But there's something really awesome about that, and I think that even driving that and kind of instilling that in a team was probably one of the more satisfying things of my time there.
So Craig, one of the things that it sounds like you were talking about over like your journey arc of WWE was optimizing content to the platform and then seeing the high impact of that when you match the correct content with the correct platform at the right time. Because you were even talking about how platforms was changing from Facebook to Instagram and all that jazz. So do you have any thoughts on that specifically as it works to high impact within an organization? Are organizations like not pairing the right content with the right platform at times, and that's why they're not seeing the high return?
Oh, Will, you are very perceptive. You nailed it too. I think, and I mean, listen, and I've probably been guilty of it myself, and with my team is that I think we all have instincts, right, as content creators and storytellers, and I think sometimes that instinct is wrong, but sometimes otherwise, if we feel really strongly about telling a story a certain way or with a vision for it, sometimes these platforms are so unique, and the output of these platforms is such an interesting take and intentionally different and unique that it requires bespoke content. And I think you learn that through experimentation, right? And I think that that's fine. You'll see what the feedback is, you see what the consumption looks like, and know that it's not working, or that this is great, keep going. And then I think examples that could be when stories first happened, when vertical video, short form, very short, vertical video first dropped, there was a tendency to want to try to fit other content that people already produce into that. And I think that was really the goal that Instagram/Facebook had with that product, was to force people, similar to Snapchat, to drive people to make unique and bespoke content that was more, quote, intimate, right? That gave you a little bit more of a look and a viewpoint of access into either a creator or a person's life. So I think we pivoted. We pivoted pretty routinely when we would find learnings from different experimentations and different platforms and different product features. And I think what we learned about stories, for example, is that you really want to have that be personality driven, give somebody access to tell the story. So we had this whole amazing roster of incredible talent with just strong personalities. It's like, let's let them tell the stories instead of us tell the stories. So that was really a key to unlocking a lot of new opportunity and new growth within Instagram specifically, but then taking that perspective to other platforms forward was just incredible, because it's true. I think the audience's requirements and the audience intent is different depending on what platform you go to and what feature within that platform you're even talking about. Their expectations just demand unique and demand something that's bespoke to that experience.
Oh, man. If you can't hear the thread through this podcast so far, I want to say that story is so stinking important. One of the leading content minds in the entertainment and digital space, Craig Tello, is basically telling you, so content is important. Oh my goodness, story is. And I want to move the conversation forward, and I'm sure you'll probably unpack it a little bit more, to your new role at a different company. Not a big deal at all. EA Sports, Electronic Arts. I don't know a ton about gaming, but I know it's a really, really big industry. Take us through the journey tell us a little bit about the role, and it's a new role. What are you doing at EA Sports? Help me understand EA Sports and our audience.
Will do. And before that, you said something awesome, Clark, and I want to kind of double click on that, which was about the marriage that exists, right, between content and story. So if you think of it this way, if people say content is king, which I've heard for years in the industry and in my professional career, I guess if you want to say that content is king, then let's call story its majestic queen. Is kind of how I would look at things, because
that's good.
They are so wed to each other in terms of how you can really push forward and generate a lot of interest, consumption, and brand affinity. So you can't have, if content is king, again, its story is really its queen, and you can't replace a strong story when it comes to creating strong content. So that said, in terms of a pivot, it's moving over to EA, and you also said something interesting, which is that it's not necessarily the particular area of business that you're familiar with, and I would say the same. I wasn't a profound gamer, quote. I wasn't somebody who necessarily spent a ton of time. Esports as a genre has been on my periphery for a while. especially because you could argue that there's a ton of parallels between what happens in esports in terms of a competition to what happens in the WWE ring, right? And there's this large spectating audience watching folks really go at it, either in a competitive capacity, either inside of a squared circle ring or on a screen of some kind. So it was very interesting to me, and esports has always been super interesting to me. And the opportunity came forward, and I think the fact that I didn't have a very strong perspective or point of view on gaming and come through that lens, I think is sort of what led to the opportunity and really moving forward. Because I think when people have that perception of what gaming is, some folks may be intimidated by it if it's not necessarily for them, it's not their cup of tea. If it's not their thing that they spend a lot of time doing, it seems like it may not be something that the kind of content that they would consume. So I think the perspective that I bring is really a general audience perspective, which I would say is something that myself and the awesome team at WWE really brought forward on the platforms, was make this content as universal and as accessible as possible, so that you're not just reliant on, you must always continue to feed back and to deliver on the content promise to the audience that is your core. But then there's still this whole massive audience. The growth really takes place outside of that core audience. And if that's the kind of work that we did at WWE, I think that's the same kind of work that can be done over at EA. And the point of view there. So my role is really is really around content strategy, but specifically on EA has a competitive gaming entertainment area of business. And what that is, if you want to think about esports as a phrase and a buzzword, the synonym is really is competitive gaming. So the content strategy for competitive gaming, how do we reach a more global audience? How do we make this super awesome, compelling, and massively growing phenomenon into something that's more globally relevant and accessible to audiences who may not be gamers today?
So is that like is that a big hole right now in the esports world, like e-gaming world? Is it a hole? Are they bringing you in to build something, or are you coming in to adjust and maintain something?
I would say it's probably somewhere in between, right? So the content itself is so powerful that it's so successful, and the team that's already been committed, the content and the broadcasts and the events are just out of this world, right? So I think the partnership that is really being built between myself and the existing team and the broadcast team is that let's really develop something that, again, transcends where it's been so far. And think about, you mentioned before about the size of the social audience at WWE. A lot of that really came down to the talent and as creators, right? And if you think about building brands, you really can't build a brand. There's no brand today that can really not look at its business, think about creating content who shouldn't be thinking about how do we build stars and how do we create people, how do we design personalities and position personalities who can really speak to an audience and create that feeling of relevance and make them feel like they're somebody who speaks their language and is somebody who's their champion and as a source of truth, frankly. So every brand today should be thinking about what kind of individual star can we build to help grow that affinity and develop that stronger relationship with the audience. So I think if you look at WWE, it's ripe with people who fit that bill. Superstars, larger than life superstars with this massive following. So I think part of the direction could be to really build stars out of the players and really start developing new content verticals that leverages their personalities and their capabilities, their very unique skills in ways that really maybe haven't been unlocked or tapped into before. So I think it's really a bridge, right? And I serve as a bridge between like a strategic marketing end of the house and the competitive gaming business, and kind of helping those things come together and just really build on top of what's already been established, but really think about cross-platform pollination and think about how we can make this. If you think about a typical event, it's hours of competition, of on-screen competition. What are different ways we can dissect that material and and position it across platforms in ways that meet people who haven't really bumped into it before.
Mm-hmm.
So Craig, a question I have, can you help us take a step back and look at practically what a lot of your role looks like and the audiences you're trying to hit and what you're trying to get them to engage in? So like you're speaking to someone who's esports illiterate. We got 2 people on our team that play like Rocket League all the time. And like, that's where my gaming knowledge starts and stops. But I know that there's this insane phenomenon where people are participating in esports in this like arena level of engagement where people are watching just in masses on these streams and whatnot. And there's these intense competitions. As you're trying to get people to engage in that, as someone who is outside of the world, like, does my engagement level look like participation in the tournament? Does my engagement level look like following and tracking the athletes, the stars that are playing? Does it look like basically this being a huge marketing funnel to get people to engage in the end product by buying the game and playing? Like, as someone who's outside of this world, what are you trying to get people to engage and do around esports and these tournaments that are happening and the content you're creating for that?
So I would say that, if you think about what the goal is of esports as a whole, right? So I think as of like 2019, a couple of years ago, the audience was a 450 million viewer audience that existed, expected to be somewhere around 650 million viewers by 2023. It's just huge. So even if you think about yourself, and I think about myself as not necessarily part of that audience, we probably either would have been or will be, is the strong likelihood.
Mm-hmm.
So
my team's trying to pull me into it as we speak. So trust me, I have a feeling I will be soon.
And you should start thinking about what your handle is going to be. Think about the gamer tag. It's very important. No. We can brainstorm that at the end.
Yeah,
I think.
Perfect.
So these are events that take place in arenas. There's a live event experience, right? So understanding that to begin with, but there's so many more people, millions of people watching and streaming this content either in real time or in VOD. And so the experience is very similar to WWE, where there's a live viewing audience who's captive, who's there for a more physical and immersive experience. And then there's people who are enjoying through any number of different devices. And so I guess what I'm super excited about is working with the team to create content that really brings that immersive experience through a screen. And so with that live event experience, what are those views and those scenes and those visuals, those moments that take place either backstage, behind the scenes, or around the way on the floor in a live event capacity, in a live setting, once the pandemic, of course, is sort of stabilized to some degree. And how do we provide that unique perspective across different platforms in supplement to this incredible long form content that's streamed and then also cut up and presented across those platforms too. And again, tell stories. So what's the story from that immersive experience? And then what are the stories and narratives associated with the gameplay? And what are the stories of the players themselves? So I guess asking about who we're engaging, it's really all those audiences too. So it's a casual person who maybe has heard about this thing and wants to understand more, maybe saw a really interesting piece of video that they didn't anticipate seeing from this universe of esports or competitive gaming. It could be somebody who is already a gamer, who wants to improve their game, who wants to be a stronger, more proficient person when it comes to holding the controller, and they want to engage and learn. And then there's also somebody who is a really aspiring professional player, or who is already a professional player, who wants to understand how they can do more and participate in what their trajectory could look like. So it's this huge spectrum, and it's just super exciting to think about the different types of opportunities and to be given the opportunity to make new things happen with an amazing team is so cool.
I was on Instagram the other day and I saw there was some college, I don't remember the college name, but there was a college that they have a whole department in a section of a building that's just dedicated, and it's decked out, it looks insane, to esports training at a college. So again, as someone that's outside of the industry looking in, help guide me. Is this something that as we're moving forward in the future is going to be a small percentage profession, like a YouTuber would be something I would compare it to where like kids are like, I want to be a YouTuber when I grow up, and parents are like, yeah, whatever, kid. And there are plenty of people that make it. There's a big piece policy around it. There's like so many people following them. Or is it going to be something that's more like collegiate athletics, to where there's a far higher participation rate as this continues to grow? And you might not exactly know the answer, but where do you potentially see this going?
That's a fantastic question. And you're right. Like, that's kind of what makes me super excited, is to see where it could go, because it could go. I think it's only going to go in probably all those directions, truthfully, where I think it will be continually more professional. I think it's interesting is that I've seen studies that kind of demonstrate how the millennial audience is far, and Gen Z is far more engaged with esports than even traditional sports. And so if that's a trend that continues, I think that what we're probably going to see is something that hasn't even been developed yet, is an experience that's probably a mixture of all these things.
Wow.
I think it's super, the pervasiveness of curriculum around it, or formal coaching and training, is something that makes me super excited and interested. If you think about developing a, just really trying to create a formal training scenario around that, it just gets me super excited. And the possibilities are super endless around that. But I think it's going to be all those things and probably a lot more.
The democratization of people being able to work on a computer, play on a computer, and generate revenue from that is what excites me, because it's the total flip of parents for years being like, that kid is burning his brains out on the computer, and now all of a sudden it can be a profession that can actually make you more money than the parents that told you it was a stupid thing to do.
It makes me entirely rethink how many coins I put into a machine however many years ago. And if I'm dating myself in an arcade scenario, or at a movie theater playing something with my friends. But no, it definitely makes me rethink a couple of steps that I took. But it's also like, it's really crazy, and it's wild to see the passion that some of these players really exude, and the skill and the talent. I'm so intimidated by these games myself and playing, and I think that's been a big part of my transition too, is just starting to play more. And to turn on one of these events and watch the competitions and the matches. It's just wild to see what level of skill and how their brains function in ways that mine is incapable of, which is is always incredibly humbling. But it's cool.
Outside of this content is king, story is queen narrative that I'm learning and hearing you unpack, and it's validating, because we're StoryBrand people. If you haven't read StoryBrand, here's a little plug, go read it. Donald Miller. We are fully bought into this idea of fantastic storytelling is the key to not only long form content, but short form content, Instagram stories and YouTube. Like, story is married to content, right? It's a great analogy, but I was going somewhere with this. I'm realizing in this conversation, second to what I just said there, I've got to learn. I got to learn so much about this industry. And I watched my nephew, who is getting my 5-year-old hooked on Nintendo Switch and playing Fortnite. He was sitting there as a 9-year-old, my nephew, playing with like 20 other kids his age. And it blew my mind. I was like, who's he talking to over there? I asked my sister, this was like 2 weeks ago. Okay. I asked my sister, who's he talking to? And she's like, oh, he's playing with a bunch of friends all over the country. I was like, what? I mean, I knew that was a thing, but I didn't expect a 9-year-old to be doing it. So, all that said, I need to learn, like Will said, I need to learn. How are you going to help us learn through social and real-time content, Craig? How are you going to help us?
Oh my. So, I think again, that the possibilities are super endless. I think you have to start playing, first of all, is how I'm going to tell you to help. But, so I think it's really, again, I'm excited about creating new content that is, it's hard because you don't want to say at a beginner level and a novice level, but I think the approach that it's important to take here is to really think about who's consuming what content on what platform, and make sure that the content that is being made fits what we presume that audience, and understand that audience is. So if we know that, and also think about how discovery works, and which platforms are really optimal for discovery for new brands and new topics. And if you think about where the largest audiences are, and if I think about YouTube and Instagram, right? So maybe there's a world where content that lives there is a little bit more casual and user friendly, as in here's 101, here's how you would get involved. Here's things to know. Here's things to like, here's a glossary content, here's content that breaks down every frame of a 30-second, just like battle mode within Apex Legends. There's a lot of different things like that are sort of easier barriers to entry for people who, again, have not really dabbled and are somewhat intimidated, but either want to have that kind of super cool experience.
Yep. Intimidated right here.
It's okay. You can raise your hand. That's fine. I get it. I was there. Still somewhat there.
Can I drive into that a little bit more real quick? What you're answering. You said something earlier about how carriers of story, you didn't say it this way, but carriers of story, meaning personalities, they take the story further. People, stars within. I think we've seen it. Our content has changed as we've created content for brands and clients. We realize that once you create stars within a content narrative, it's a better carrier of those stories. So are you talking about users that are gaming? Are you talking about superstars that are validating the industry? Like, what kind of storytellers are you talking about might amplify this? Is that question okay?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think looking at the landscape and thinking about what's happening in esports today, I think there's probably a ton of opportunity to unlock, I mentioned before, really unlock the personality of some of the players and let the story sort of unfold, flourish through their lens, really give them the opportunity to emote and explain kind of their story. Everybody has an individual story. I think about all the really compelling documentary series, et cetera, that have taken place over the years through NFL, even NBA. Every major sports has a doc arm at this point. And there's no reason that those aren't stories that could be told at an esports level, at a competitive gaming level. I think that's what makes the competition even more relatable and more exciting, frankly. So I think, again, allowing the players to really open up and be who they are and kind of demonstrate that through a lens is pretty important and is a pretty cool opportunity. I think that also is what helps people relate again. And I think content needs to be something that's relatable. That's really what drives the engagement. But then outside of that, I think there's really cool and interesting things that EA has done. Like Derwin James versus the World is a franchise that they kicked off where, in terms of Madden competitive gameplay, they picked Derwin James, who's the absolute greatest Madden player in the NFL, where he plays against a variety of different players or celebrities, folks from pop culture, which is really awesome. I think that's a really great way to look at things, to kind of create and build an audience that maybe wasn't already watching this type of content. And I think that's a perfectly valid and really cool opportunity and avenue to take ahead, where you find different types of players who are maybe more casual, and I think tell a different story through their lens as well, and watch their gameplay or hear their story about them playing games is super, super interesting. And I think it's the kind of thing that would allow somebody an easier barrier, and it's the kind of thing that would allow somebody entry into this universe again, and it's the kind of thing that would permit somebody who's not from this universe easier entry.
Yeah.
Sorry, not from this universe. I'm feeling it, man. My dad asked me, what's this Instagram app on my phone the other day? And I kind of feel like my dad.
Well, in similar fashion, Clark, your dad thinks that your job consists of you playing on your
playing
iPhone
games.
all day.
You're right.
And then there's a lot of people that think that their kids playing on video games all day is totally just wasting of time.
I'm aware.
As culture flips, man,
I am my dad.
Culture flips. You are your dad. Doesn't that all catch up? So, Craig, the most important question is, what game does Clark need to get Reed playing to really start to train up as a pro athlete, so that Clark can start bankrolling off of his kid live streaming on YouTube and the main other streaming platform that gamers primarily use, Twitch.
Yeah, so if you want to get him up on Twitch, that's right. If you want to get him up on Twitch, I think it's sort of like, here's a couple options, right? So you could either do if he's a hardcore sports player, if you think he's really into athletics, so then go that path and pick either a FIFA or go a Madden, right? And I think those are really, really easy entry points, because I think they're already there's a baseline understanding of how the game plays that somebody can that he can jump into, and that's one way. Then there's the other way, which is the Apex Legend, which is sort of like shoot 'em up. Complete like immersive universe, expanded world of fantasy, where you can really be any kind of personality and go unleash hell. So I think those are the two different paths that you could potentially take.
I take your feedback.
So Reed can go the Madden route, and Clark, I can hop on the Apex route.
You can. What am I going to do?
You're going to hop on Apex with me. Craig, I was texting Tessa, who's helping produce this, and I was like, all right, follow-up content to this. We have to have a day here in the next week where me, Clark, and Craig hop on a Twitch stream. I don't even know if you can put 3 people in a Twitch stream. Hop in a Discord server is what all the gamers use, I'm told. And you have to teach us Apex Legends or something.
Oh, wow.
Like.
Okay.
This is going to be a scenario of the blind leading the blind, guys. I'll be completely honest with you.
Perfect.
That will be more entertaining.
We will learn together. Yes.
Exactly. Honestly, I think if we record it, it could be killer content because I know we're going to say some wild things.
We're going to be the stars of the future of Craig's work. He's going to say, you know what? I recorded this like 5 years ago. We should pull this out.
It can be EA. When they come out with the series EA Fails, we can be like premiere of the EA
the
Fails
Instagram
series.
account. Yeah.
It's the opposite of the Esports Legends. They're just watching it to see other people who are just trash at the games.
Mm-hmm. Craig, I'm going to ask you one more question here. I think we'll see how this goes here, but what is a big challenge that you have right now when it comes to telling stories, whether it's platform or narrative, or like what are the challenges you're currently facing in your new role when it comes to crafting, executing, and delivering compelling stories to your audiences? You've said that. What's a big problem? Not 10 problems. What's a big problem you're facing that you're trying to overcome?
So the biggest problem that I think I would see almost any brand, and it's pretty consistent with any conversation or dialogue that I have, it's resources. It's how do you smartly deploy a finite number of resources and prioritize the right platforms, the right stories. It's a difficult challenge, and you don't really meet it without insights and strong data. And really analysis around that data, somebody to really interpret it, because there's so many false positives and false negatives that it's hard to tell. It really is just persistence of creation. I think you cannot stop creating. And I think if the resourcing is the biggest challenge and the biggest issue and problem that we all face, then the antidote is the unpopular antidote would probably be is really reliance on the passion of the people that we're all partnered up with to make this content. And I think,
that's good.
When we talk through even that real time summit, when we talked about the aspect and the quality of real time reaction and response, there's a lot of demand that goes into that. And it's timeliness. It's an appropriate reaction that's fit for an appropriate platform. So what is the appropriate formula and format for a piece of content in a real time scenario, ideally capturing the environment and a scene on a specific platform. And, the winded chase associated with telling that story in a succinct and swift fashion is something that I think comes with a very specific DNA and probably a little bit of a dose of masochism for somebody who's really in this, in that line of business to create and tell those stories. So really to feel passionate about the stories and to feel really strongly about the wins and to really be interested and invested in learning from things that are not necessarily wins, and continuing to build upon that is the only way to really find that success, because I think the platforms will only continue to build, multiply. There will only be new aspect ratios, right? I mean, only new aspect ratios of video that will need to be creating. And I think it's just a tirelessness, and you can do your best to operationalize, I think is absolutely the right path. How do we prioritize which formats and which platforms we really want to go after, where we're going to see the greatest return? But you have to, and then from that, you operationalize and say, okay, we're always going to do this X, Y, and Z for this type of content. But then the experimentation stuff really is dependent on your passion level and how enthusiastic you are about satisfying a very massive appetite for a very massive audience.
Clark, that he just tied in there that is like so key that you do all the time at events, and it's so key to like that producer mindset that he's talking about, is the recognition and balance between tweaking to try to always do better while also recognizing limited resources and then how to most effectively capitalize on them and use them. There's only so much time in the day for one. So your time resources are minimum. You only have so many members on a team, so your human capital is limited. Oftentimes you only have so much ad budget, so you can only run so many ads and so many different direct audiences, and you only have so many editors and photographers and people making the content. And so like you always got to be tweaking, but you also are always recognizing that you only have so much time and so many resources. And so everything has to be strategically thought out. Clark and I were on a call the other day, and we were talking about producers, and I jokingly called them opinion casters because like that's what strategy is. It's opinion casting. You're saying based off of my knowledge and understanding, this is my opinion on how we should move forward. It might be right, it might be wrong, but the ones that rise to the top are the opinion casters with the most effective opinions, the ones that are using the most information backing to do the tweaking. And so that's super interesting because ultimately that's the tug and pull, at least that I see from that producer level mindset of how to produce the greatest content is how to tweak the most efficiently and capitalize on the resources most efficiently. Because if you're over tweaking every single detail, you'll run your resources dry and you won't get a single piece of content out.
That is really perfectly stated. I 100% agreement, man. You completely nailed it. You sound like somebody who maybe has experience in this area.
As opinion casting?
I have someone who in opinion casting 100%. I call Clark the strategist, and I'm just the true opinion caster.
Has that been hard on teams? We're going to wrap this in a second here, but Craig, has that been hard as a leader across your career working from Marvel projects to WWE to G4 to now EA Sports? Is it hard as a leader to navigate that with your team, and how do you navigate that?
It's so important because you listen, like at least how I was raised was and how I grew into my professional career was that you treat folks with respect. There's the golden rule that even my first grader talks about. You treat others how you want to be treated, right? Yeah. And I think understanding and putting myself in anybody's shoes and what their role is sort of key to like a mutual success and what a partnership is. And I think that's not rhetoric, right? Like I think that's how you find success.
That's right.
And
that's right.
So, if I've been working at EA for a short period of time, a lot of my first several weeks are all just meeting people and understanding. Just need to understand what it is that they do, because I can't begin to opinion cast. I can't begin to opinion cast. I wonder if we should start implementing this one. Yes. I can't opine. I can't be an opinion caster if I don't understand what's been done, because then, in terms of even building my own credibility, but also just mutual respect of an entire organization or a group of people, you have to understand where they've come from and understand the learnings from that too. So again, it means nothing if I say you have to really look at data, read and understand and try to follow through on analysis. So that's exactly what I'm doing, right? Is trying to understand what's where they've come from and where we could potentially go in partnership. And it's 100% challenging for any team it's insurmountable, right? Even when you read about new platforms or you hear from these platform leaders that kind of tease a new functionality within an app, it's sort, again, like I said before, it's part-time exhilarating, but then it creates a lot of anxiety and stress about how are we going to feed yet another mouth, a digital or social mouth, when it comes to creating this giant content meal, right? And it's just, but you just have to like think through the lens of, again, I'm a storyteller. I love telling stories and I love paying off a story. You just have to say, I can't wait to add this to my tool set. You just have to say, I can't wait to add this to my tool set. And you kind of just go from there. And again, you ideally have to kind of pull that out of folks and try to share that perspective with folks. Yeah. And again, respecting what their restrictions are, respecting what people's limitations are, what resourcing really is, and then building efficiently to find the best gain possible. Really using at that point, you're maximizing people's time and for the overall success and benefit of the team, but then with consideration of people's daily lives.
So you're a great opinion caster, by the way. I just want you to know you're a phenomenal opinion caster. You have shared your opinion on content is king and story is closely married and intimately acquainted as the majestic queen. You said, I loved that. You've talked about the need for us to leverage stars and personalities to carry those stories, and you've talked about the need for us to just create a bunch of freaking content so that we can test and test and test. But the opinion that we care about most right now, Craig Tello, the one and only, is what, Will?
What should my gamer tag be is ultimately what the most important opinion out of you today is going to have to be, is helping me develop a gamer tag. I polled our team. So I sent a message
in the middle of this
and said, all right, quick poll to the whole team. What should my gamer tag be as I create accounts?
Read the best one.
Yeah. We got boy band Black Sheep. That was one of them. I have a feeling this one's taken, but one of the team members said it should be your mom, so that anytime you win, the opponent will see you lost to your mom. That one was pretty fun. We got don't mess with vest. That was another one. There's several good ones in here, but ultimately you got to help guide me, Craig. What should my gamer tag be?
Go, Craig.
Oh man. Infinite kills Will. I don't know. I don't.
Infinite kills Will.
If you go the
it plays on route, the Kill Bill. I like it.
Yeah,
I like it.
If you go the Apex route, that's your handle. You could always just go with I'm sure it's taken Ill Will,
Ill Will. There we go.
Yeah, your game is so ill, but I'm sure that's got to be taken, right? Let's be honest. I mean,
if not, all the people listening to this podcast, the thousands and millions of people listening, they're going to go get it if it's not taken.
We're just going to start replacing the I with a number 1, and this is where it all begins, right?
There we go.
Oh man.
And then secondarily, what's your gamer tag, Craig?
Yeah, good question.
Oh, so I'm in the middle of rebooting and rebranding across.
Yeah, he's not giving it away.
I like it.
No, I have it. So it's actually Craig Wolf on like.
There we go.
But the wolf is with a U, like Beowulf. You know what I mean? And it's just too bad you can't get. Is it an umlaut, guys? The 2 dots. I don't.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can't do that, unfortunately. In most of these, but it's a U representative of that. It's fair, there in spirit. Fair. But Craig Wolf is the one.
Is Craig Wolf Twitch streaming? Like, can we follow Craig Wolf's journey in his EA Sports career?
You can't follow my journey necessarily. I don't think that if it would be a private channel, but you can. I'm sure pretty soon see stuff like that. Hopefully, and fun, because I think that's the fun thing, right? That's the fun topic, and you went to that area because it'd be really cool to see something that you wouldn't expect to see on a Twitch or a YouTube or Instagram stream of some kind. So. Hopefully that's the kind of fun stuff that's coming soon. And but I got a little bit of a road ahead of me before we start making any kind of changes or new updates and create some interesting stuff like that.
All right, guys, I just created mine. It's Clark Campbell 000. Is that okay?
Clark Campbell 000. You get ready for Craig Wolf to dominate you, my friend. Craig Wolf's gonna kill you in Apex.
Craig Wolf is
don't mess with Vest will be behind.
Listen, we have been talking with an absolute legend in the content world, Craig Tello. We're honored that you spent an hour or so with us while you had a cat. Your kids are at home. It's snowing. Like, you got all the distractions you need, and you spent time with us. So we're going to let you go back to your family. I am so grateful for you, Craig. Thank you for your time. And we look forward to seeing you again in person. Hopefully we can come visit you up in snowy New England or the southeast New England. You're in Connecticut, so you're in southern New England.
There we go.
You nailed it. That's
Craig.
Right. Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you, guys. It's been a blast. I'm going to go back and turn to my Xbox and appreciate everything today. Good journey to you guys.
Thanks, you, sir.
Thank you so much for joining us this week on Reverb Roundtable. This episode really made me interested in seeing what all of the hype around esports is, which is something I've never been able to say before. Though I don't really know how I'm going to top the handle boy band Black Sheep. Personally, that was my favorite one submitted for Will. We know that many of you are listening to this podcast while driving to work or in between meetings, which means you don't really have time to take notes. So we are going to be providing show notes for every single episode, so you never have to worry about remembering a big point from something ever again. All you need to do to get those notes is go to rvrb.cc/podcast and subscribe to our email list. Once again, don't forget to subscribe so that you don't miss our next episode, and we will see you next week.